for those of you who don't know, we are Mother Lode Wildlife Care. We're all volunteers, and there's currently 14 of us. I think we've got maybe up to 15, but that's low. And it's really shown what's happened throughout COVID. We had to shut everything down for a while. Most of our volunteers are all senior citizens, and we were all at high risk. And so that was not something we wanted to do, was to put people together into a closed space and breathe on each other. So it really has affected what we can do and how we can do it. We are a nonprofit. We've been permitted by Fish and Wildlife. We care for injured and orphaned diseased wildlife, specializing in native birds, squirrels, and other small mammals. But to give you an idea, 2022, we've done about 140 animals. Pre-COVID, 2018, we did 248 animals. So that's quite a bit different. And our goal, of course, is to release them back into the habitat capable of surviving on their own. So yeah, when things were good, we had volunteers and we had a central facility where volunteers could come in and offer 4 hours, 1 day a week. And we would feed baby birds. And that is the best way to do baby songbirds, is with a team of volunteers that do 4-hour shifts, and you have 3 shifts a day, and it's every single day, and it's from dawn till dusk. So these happen to be a group of flickers that came out of Mountain Ranch, I think, quite a ways north. They'd cut the tree down, realized the nest was inside. They sent me pictures, and I said, don't do this. They're so close to fledging. If you tie that, chunk of tree that has the nest in it onto another tree, the parents will finish this out in a week and they'll be gone. And the guy said, no, there's woodpeckers everywhere. There's woodpecker damage everywhere. And I said, these aren't woodpeckers. They'll bother your leaf litter more than they'll peck on your trees, your house. But he wouldn't have it, so we went ahead and took them. And the volunteers absolutely loved them because they're just a bunch of clowns. We had them in a big room, and they'd fly around and they'd land on your head, and you're supposed to be feeding them. And eventually, of course, they end up out in an outdoor aviary, and they wild up and they don't land on anybody's head anymore. And then we took them all back to Mountain Ranch and let them go. Didn't tell the guy and didn't necessarily put it on his property, but they were back in the neighborhood. So, and we also do swallows and robins and finches and wrens and all of those. I mean, wrens, they're wonderful, fun little birds, but feed them every 20 minutes from dawn till dusk. And that works so much better when you have shifts of volunteers coming through. This nest at the bottom did come in this year, and since we haven't had a central facility with volunteers, all we could do is people that were willing to take them into home care. And Karen actually took that nest, and I think there were 7 of them in there, and raised them up, and she's working. She sits at her desk and just keeps feeding these things. Thankfully, she's now retired and I have her full time. So, but yeah, it really makes a difference if we have a central facility, and we are moving. And so we don't know exactly where that's going to be yet, but we're hoping by the end of the year, we'll have a location. So, and then of course, there's the big kids. That was a Swainson's hawk that came up from Modesto. And mostly it wasn't doing very well where it was. It was found in a mechanic's yard, and it was pretty skinny and dirty. So we were able to feed it up, and we took it down and released it down in the, that, I don't remember now, it's the wildlife refuge down there. I talked with your friend at the Stanislaus Audubon, Stan, and yes, Sal, that was it. So we did let it go down there, and we've been getting Cooper's hawks in. We get a number of those, and they're funny little things, and there's just nothing funnier than little great horned owls. So I had to put in all of those, and of course the little baby screech owl isn't exactly what you call a bigger kid, but he still eats like a bigger kid. So, and repeat customers. There's a guy down in Jamestown who has a tree and a branch broke off of the tree up at the top, and the kestrels still use the nest, even though it's not really a cavity anymore. It's more like a kind of an open nest, but it probably is kind of deep. But every year the kids fall out, or they bail or something. And so I think this 4 years in a row I've gotten these kestrels, and they come in and we feed them up until they're old enough and they're flying, and then we take them back and the parents are waiting for them. And the parents continue their, training. But it's like, I want to get myself out of this equation. So I'm going to make them a box this year that's going to go on the tree, and I really hope the parents use it and the kids stay in the box. And then birds that need landing gear. All of these birds that have feet at the back end instead of in the middle, like a mallard or a goose, they end up coming down when you've got a road that's got water on it, like a rainstorm. They land on it thinking it's a lake, and they can't take off without being in water. So they're grounded. And there's two things that happen. They're coming in thinking they're landing on water. They hit the asphalt. So of course that's hard abrasion. And the keel bone that runs down through here, if that gets abraded, then you've got trouble. You can't release a bird if it's got lesions on its keel. And the other thing that happens is that they have, the top of the surface of a wet road picks up all the oil and gas that's on the road, and that destroys their waterproofing. And so you can't let it go if it's not waterproof. So the first thing we do when we get these guys is we check their keels and make sure there's no damage to the keel bone. And then they go in the laundry tub or the bathtub and we make sure that they're waterproof, or we have to give them baths and make sure that then they retain their waterproofing. Both of these guys did. They didn't come in on the road. They hit the roof of the Somerville High School. They have flat gravel roofs that ponded with water, and they were coming in and hitting there. So that is a happy little ear grebe after we took them back to Salisburyville Pond. Yeah. And I think, listen to them. You can hear them call. And then. Yeah. Oh, look at him die. So that's a happy bird. And then who else gets to take showers with osprey? This was a kid that also came out of the nest and ended up like underneath a car, was hiding underneath a car. And that's all grease and everything else that was stuck to the front of his feathers. So he went in my shower. But we got him cleaned up, we got him waterproofed, he started grooming, and then he went back and flew free. Let's see, now it's not working again.
So did you have to wash him 3 times a day for a week or something like Dawn?
No, you try and get it in there and you get it done right then. So yeah, we were able to break down the grease that was in there and get his feathers waterproof. And then you go down, you put them down in the flight cage, and they'll preen and they'll take baths and they'll preen, and then away they go.
So how do you get the feathers waterproof?
A lot of warm water, more than anything else. Warm water continuously keeps, that's how they do it when you've got.
It's not like a duck, right? Where ducks got a little gland or something and you get some oil.
Oh, no. You usually use Dawn dish soap in order to wash them. The main thing you've got to have is you've got to have an animal that's stable to begin with. So if he's stable, then you can, because it's a lot of stress. It's a huge ordeal, and that's why you want to work quickly and quietly and get it done and then get them out. So for some reason, I'm not sure this is working again. All right. There you go. Okay. Yeah, and and they're, well, you get to watch the release. Sometimes they come in the hayloads. Yeah, isn't that cool? I love watching them go. These guys came in a truckload of hay, but the problem was they weren't found in the truckload of hay for about a week. So even though they were flying and probably capable of hunting, they were dying in the hay when they found them. So we gave them a lot of fluids and got them doing okay and stable, and then made sure they could hunt, and then we let them go. And this is not an owl. Everybody thinks that's an owl. A guy picked this up in Tahoe, and it is a common porwheel, for those of you who don't know. I don't think they're common at all. I think they're very uncommon. He picked it up in Tahoe, put it in a Rubbermaid tub, brought it home, said he had an owl. Took me 3 days to convince him to give it to me. And by that time, this bird had backed into the Rubbermaid tub so many times he'd broken all of his tail feathers. And this was September, and they either migrate, or, believe it or not, these birds hibernate. They're the only bird that does truly hibernate. But you know, September, they're heading south. They're looking for warmer temperatures. And so we pulled his tail thinking that we could get him in a month. A tail grows in, we'd still get him out in October. We thought we could do that. Well, his body decided that this was the wrong time to grow feathers, and I'm going to sit here without a tail. So then we figured out we had to keep him over the winter, which he doesn't want to be here in our temperatures. And so we made him a little thing that we could put him in the house, and he lived in the house.
Can you say the name again, please?
It's a common porwheel. Yeah, they're also if you've heard of lesser nighthawks, they're also in the same, it's called the goatsucker family, and I'm not quite sure where that comes from.
So he's different than a whippoorwill?
No, he's in the same family. They're all goatsuckers. They hunt in dawn and dusk, and they eat moths on the wing. So they'll fly and eat moths. So they never, ever, ever self-feed in captivity. So here we're looking at having to keep a bird over the winter in a climate it's not wanting to be in, and trying to get him to be happy. So we made him this little thing, and porwheels, I read an article about a porwheel that said it hibernated in a hole in the rock in Death Valley, 2 feet off the ground with snow on the ground, and a coyote walked past and didn't even know it was there. And so because I read that and I heard that, I gave him a little rock hide, thinking, okay, he could hide in there. Well, of course, no, he sat on top. And the other problem with it was he continued to do more damage to his wings on the rocks. And so we ended up having to pull the rocks. So like I said, they don't eat in captivity. And if you notice all the way over here, this piece of paper is our record. We keep a weight, took a weight every day, 44, 45, 47, 46. And this is how many pieces of kibble we fed them. So we fed them 3 times a day, and we keep a track. And this is, we'll show you. So that's feeding them, and it varied. We tried different kinds of kibble because we wanted to give them the best diet possible. And the best diet would be moths, which he spat out, crickets, which he also spat out. I'll do that one again. Well, it'll probably go forward. And we tried kitten kibble because it had higher protein. And finally, we just said, I don't care. We doctored it with calcium and vitamins and amino acids. And, we kept him for a year, and he finally grew in all of his feathers, and we put him out in the flight cage, and I put a light in there so that I would attract moths into the cage. And I love these night vision cameras. So that was right before we took him out released him. So he did make it, even though we had to keep him for a whole year and fed him kibble. Yeah. He's a little thing, 50 grams. He's like a robin size, something like that. Yeah, he's not. Robin's probably way more than that, so even smaller. Yeah. So, and then sometimes you get in an animal. This is a juvenile red-tailed hawk that was hit by a car. But when we got him, we realized that that was like the least of the problems. The feet on this bird are just horrible. And for a juvenile to come in with feet like this, I have no idea what was the cause. This is a case of bumblefoot, and you can tell like that black toe, she would lose that toe if we hadn't done something. And all of these black things are lesions that are bacterial infections that are going into the bone. And so if we weren't able to stop that, they would lose toes. And of course, birds of prey don't do too well without toes. So got medi-pedis for weeks. we hood them and soak their feet, use toothbrushes to keep cleaning them and try to get those lesions off. And then we put ointment on that also helps to kill the infection, and wrapping the toes. And of course, all of that is very time consuming, very stressful on a bird like this that doesn't want to be handled like that. And so when you can get to the point where you can wrap them for a week and just push all the ointment inside, inject it into the wrap, you can put it outside and kind of start getting it some space. So before, you can see what that toe looked like. And you can see the lesions on the sides, and there's big lesions here. So, and those, I keep wanting to call them pink feet, but they're not pink. But I mean, they're just absolutely gorgeous. All of the lesions came off, and there's nothing. There's a little bit of scar tissue along the side here, and you can see some of it here, but it's all beautiful. So, and then we got this guy. More bad feet. A little green heron came out of Jamestown, and you can see his toe. I mean, he had badly broken toe. And so we put a little shoe on. He's got a little shoe, and he's got, all the toes are all lined up and placed right. And as soon as I had the shoe on, I realized that there was something wrong with the other ankle. So then he got the last wrap and he got that one braced. So we kept him, and frankly, I love the hairdo. I think they're really fun birds. That's the other part. They stick their head up in the air. Their eyes rotate toward you so that they can still see you, even though they're looking, their beaks pointed straight up, and they wave back and forth like I'm a reed in the wind. You don't see me. So they're just really funny. And they really like a private, they're very private. They can be very stressy birds. And so you give them a hide. Of course, the first thing this one did was use it as a perch. So, and you can tell at the very end, all of the wraps are off, feet are good, and he went back and was released down in Jamestown. Yeah. And it really helps if you're going to fall out of a tree and break your leg to do it in the vet's backyard. So this bird came to me from Dr. Kaler in Modesto, already with a leg pinned because it had fallen out of his tree, and he pinned it. He called me and he said, "Would you continue care for the bird?" And I said, "Sure." But I noticed that the hallux on that same foot, that foot that has the wrap, is also the one that was pinned. The hallux would fold under so that when it stood, it was actually walking on the back toe. So we put that little wrap up to keep the toe back behind. It could still stand on a perch and still grasp with a perch. And it was just because the pin that was in the leg was pressing on the nerve. So once you pulled the pin, we were able to take the wrap off, and And he went back to Dr. Kaler's yard and was released. So we don't do a lot of bats, but I did get this, it was a big brown bat, came in with a torn wing membrane. And that wing is all the way, that's supposed to be connected, that entire area. So it's about a 3-inch tear, goes all the way up into the bone. And I called a bat specialist and said, you know, is there any hope? And she said, well, big brown bats, they like them. They like them for education. So even if it doesn't mend, I can place it for it. So you won't have to kill it, in other words. So I said, okay, and we tried. So from July to April, you can tell we got only about, it's about 3/4 of an inch where it grew, but that means we're missing about 2 inches. So we were going to put her into education, but about the same time we got, it seems to stop working all of a sudden. All right, let's try it again. There, we got in this little guy. He got his face slammed in the door. So he was not a happy man. But this is a little brown bat. So he's only about 1 inch tall. And then COVID-19 really hit. And Fish and Wildlife says, okay, no more bats, because, you know, they were talking about COVID coming through the bat population in Wuhan. And so they said, you know, you either don't take them in or take them in and euthanize them, or keep them and until we sort out what we're going to do. So I already had these two. So it was like, okay, you know, we'll just keep it for a while. So about 6 months later, they came back. Fish and Wildlife said, okay, we're going to have you test these guys, see if they have COVID. If they don't have COVID, we'll let them go. And they give us Q-tips and say we're, you know, are essentially Q-tips, that we're supposed to swab their mouth and their anus. Now, a bat this big, you can find the anus, but a bat this big, that's kind of a whole nother story. So thankfully they gave us a third option, which was feed the little kid. And when he pooped in the sack that I put him in, I could send the poop in. So they accepted all of that, and turns out we didn't have COVID. Both of them. This one went into an education facility, and that one is flying free again in Twain Harte. So, and then you get incredible things. So I had a couple of guys call me from Groveland, said they picked up a great horned owl in the middle of the road. Could they bring it in? And they dropped their tailgate, and they have a kennel, you know, it's like a cat kennel with a door that's about this big, and it's just filled with that face. And all I can do is look at it and say, that's not a great horned owl. That's a great gray owl. And you know, at first you just kind of go, oh, wow. And then you look at what you've got, and you can see the fractures. And all of this here is basically just bone mush. It was just totaled. And Dr. Jackson and I looked at each other and we said, I can't kill it. Can you kill it? She says, no. And so I took it back home again. And I called, or we sent the x-ray to both the state and the feds and said, it's your decision. And of course, they agreed with us that we couldn't save the wing, and we did have to euthanize it. But it meant I had, you know, 4 or 5 days where I got to look at that amazing creature and feed it and care for it, and wish I could have done more. And then you get pictures like this in my text. I absolutely hate fences. I pull great horned owls out of barbed wire fences and deer, and I just hate fences. So when Indigene sent me this, it's like, I can't stand this. This is the day before Thanksgiving. And you guys may have seen the article in the paper about it. My husband and I went out, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I've never dealt with an adult fox that is basically alert. And I had no idea how I was going to handle it. but we had a comforter, welding gloves, and Bernard had wire cutters. And I ran at the fence because as soon as you start approaching him, he starts flipping out and he's trying to get away from you and he's making matters worse. So I ran at him and threw the comforter over him, waited until I could get his head out from, the squares that he'd wound himself through. And then Bernard couldn't figure out how the leg was wrapped around. And so we just cut the wires and we put him in a kennel. So now I've got an adult fox in a kennel. It's like, what do I do now? So I called Dr. Jackson, of course, and she'd just been exposed to COVID and was in lockdown. She couldn't meet with me because she had to be protected. So Dr. Henderson over at Jamestown Veterinary, I called her and said, please, I don't know how I'm going to hang on to him, but can you help me? I don't know what else to do. So we were able to, I was really amazed. I didn't think an adult fox would be handleable. I really didn't, not without anesthesia. But I was able to get a hold of him and hang on to him. And she checked the leg and said, well, the ligaments are torn. You probably got a month. You can see if it reattaches. Poor prognosis. It's probably surgery or euthanize it. And it was the day before Thanksgiving. It's like, well, okay, it's quiet. Let's try. Let's see what happens. But how do you care for something like that? You've got it in a cage. You have to clean it. You've got to give it food and water. You have to make sure it's not chewing its leg off or its wrap off, so you have to somehow be able to monitor him. And I put him in this hospital cage and I had toweling on the floor and a kennel and, towel in the kennel, towel over the kennel. So he had a nice hide, food and water dishes. And I would come in every morning and the place was trash. And, poop everywhere. All of the blankets were shoved up in the corner, sopping wet, because the water dish was empty. And I would think he was furious trying to get out. And that's why we named him Fury. But this is what he was really doing. He just liked to rearrange the furniture. And he did it all night long. So, you can tell he's not upset. He's just trying to get comfy. Yeah, well, he's got every single one of them in that ball. And he would, and then he'd bring it back out and, the kennel would be upside down and there he just settles down. So I really love these night cameras because I've watched more footage of these guys that it's really been a lot of fun. So you can see the plate and all of the screws she put in, and then we're back to a fox in a kennel again. And he looks so sweet. But he's back to rearranging the furniture.
So can he be released to the wild with all those pins?
He already was. Yes. Yeah. She was, he just such a charmer. And it looks like, what's the problem? So Tanya kind of wondered about taking the pins out. She says he'll feel cold in that foot. But it had healed up so well, she didn't want to cut him open again because at that point, then he would have had to go back to being wrapped up in a little tiny cage until it healed. So you can tell, we keep moving him into different cages and you can see how he's kind of hopping around. You can see how he's favoring that leg, but he's still climbing. And then we move him into a bigger cage. And this was shortly before release.
There's that high alpine fox that they climb, right?
That it is, yeah. And you can see he still favors it just a bit, but we figured, he's using the trees to climb. And geez, when we tried to catch him, he was climbing up the vertical 8-foot wall, just straight up. It's like, okay. So this was release day back to indigeny, and with hopes that he would avoid the fence. And this is, of course, what we live for. This is what we do it for, is to be able to watch it run free. And then I got a call to go pick up an osprey that was in the road down at Lake Tulloch. And I figured it was just a kid that had left the nest, but he was on the wrong side of the highway and he was going to get whacked. So I drove down there and caught the kid and checked him out, and he was in good shape. So I went over to the Lakes Treatment Center, which is there. And I found some guys that were standing at the edge of the lake. And so I asked them, I said, can I put this osprey on the rocks here so that you can, and if it's still there later in the afternoon, I'll come back down and I'll get it again. But I think he's fine. I think he'll fly off. I just don't want him flying across the road and getting hit. They said, sure. Are you going to take the porcupine? What do you mean? Am I going to take the porcupine? And they were standing next to Tulloch Lake, and there was a porcupine that was right at the water's edge on the rocks. This was 105-degree heat. He was not doing it all well. And I'm thinking, what is he doing here, first of all? And it's like, well, yeah, I'll take the porcupine. So I traded an osprey for a porcupine, another thing not too many people get to say. And it was fascinating.
Are they indigenous to here?
Well, and that's actually something I talked, I think there are better places for him than where he was. I really think he hopped a ride on a car, inside a car, and then got out of the parked car and ended up at the lake. But Fish and Wildlife, when I was talking to them, believed they're saying that there's some evidence that they think that there are lowland porcupines. And if he had made it, they would have wanted me to release him back at Lake Tulloch, and I would have had a hard time doing that because I don't think it was the appropriate habitat. I had talked with John up at CSERC, and he had given me some really wonderful places for porcupines in Groveland, and I would have much rather done that. But as it turns out, we believe he had a brain parasite, and he really did deteriorate over a couple of weeks. We got him eating. Actually, when I first started, he was just taking Gatorade out of a syringe. He was so overheated and exhausted. When I got him outside into the cage, he did a lot better. He was eating both the leaves and stuff that I was putting in there, and then other stuff. It was still so hot. I would put bottles of frozen water and he would lay on them. But he did deteriorate. He did continue to deteriorate. He started spinning and he couldn't really function. And it was obvious he wasn't going to make it. And then you get something, I don't even know how somebody found this thing. That's an itty bitty chipmunk. And that really is the size of a quarter. So the picture over here, this chipmunk, this is him a couple weeks later, and this is a baby western gray squirrel, and that chipmunk is still smaller than him. But I mean, you can't beat how cute that is. And even though he was raised up alone, he wilded up fine, and he went back out where he was supposed to be. So, but gosh, cute. And this red-shouldered hawk was actually here just a couple of months ago. It was hit on Phoenix Lake Road, and you can see the fracture right there. So we thought the radius was broken, which is the long skinny bone there, but it was intact. So it actually acted like a splint for the broken ulna. So we thought, oh, this is going to be an easy one. We wrap it up, put them in the cage, and we'll just wait a couple of weeks. Well, the next morning, the wrap's on the floor. So I take it out and I wrap it again. Wraps on the floor the next day. And so he was little Houdini. No matter what kind of wrap I did, no matter how well I taped it, it was always on the floor when I went in the morning. So after 4 or 5 of those, I called Tanya and said, hey, you know, I can't keep a wrap on this bird. Is it okay if I keep the wrap off? It does have the radius. She says, well, you're not supposed to do that. It's like, yeah. But what I was worried about was that every time he would contort to get that wing out of the wrap, he could be displacing that fracture more. Didn't want that to happen. And so finally, Tanya or Dr. Jackson agreed, said, well, just see if you can keep him calm. Well, red-shouldered hawks are not calm birds, but for the most part, he did okay. You know, you can tell that went a little bit lower. He did pretty good. And I just, you know, you got to get in there. You got to clean them. You got to feed them. You got to make sure everything's okay. And you got to do it calmly and quietly. And, you know, once they start bouncing off the walls, you have to do something else. So I would get about maybe 10 days into it, and you could tell he was starting to bounce off the walls. So then we had to move him into a slightly larger room, which is where he is there. And then eventually he made it down to the flight cage and we released him. He flew great. So a couple that we have in care right now, this Western screech owl was hit by a car, and you can tell that this eye is no longer functional. The other eye is, though. He's eating very well. We're going to put him outside, and I've released a lot of one-eyed screech owls. I have to verify that they can first find a perch, because of course, no depth perception like when we've only got one eye. So they have to be able to hit a perch, and then you put branches in, and you've got to make sure that they don't smack into every branch as they're flying across the cage. They've got to be able to see enough to go around it. And then of course, he's got to be able to hunt. So he's got 3 tests he has to pass, but if he does that, he'll go free. And so far he's doing okay. And then this beautiful bird came in from Yosemite Valley, and you can tell by the way she's sitting that there's an issue. She's actually using her tail for support, and she has a broken pelvis. And she also has the right wing, the metacarpals, which are the finger bones, have 3 fractures in them. And generally the metacarpals, when they're broken, generally that's a poor prognosis and we euthanize. But she's done so well. She was emaciated when I got her. She's very food motivated. She lunges at the food dish before I can even get it in the cage. So she's gained weight. And the fractures in the metacarpal aren't at the joints. So we thought we'd just try it and see if she still has that fine-tuned control when it heals. Because a lot of times when the fractures heal, the callus will block the joints, and then she won't have any movement. And that, of course, the metacarpals are all her leading edge flight feathers. And she's also still collapsing on the right leg or on the left leg. So even though it's been about 2 weeks with the pelvic fracture, I was hoping for a little better response, but we'll see. I'll talk to the vet again this weekend and see what she thinks about the leg. And because if you know me, I have always got to have cute pictures of squirrels. So those are Western grays up top, and of course possums. And this is just, I think, one of the sweetest pictures. We don't normally ever mix species, not even usually 2 different kinds of squirrels. But that little California ground squirrel had been cat caught and really didn't even think he wanted to live any longer. And I had that little possum that was all by itself, and I put them together, and about 3 days later, they were both doing great. So they both got buddies of their own species and went on to be released. And that one's a little flying squirrel. Douglas squirrel, another little ground squirrel, and a jackrabbit who also doesn't know how to use a hide. Treats it like a hammock instead of hiding behind it. But so I think that's all my stories for now.
Yeah.
Purpose.
Good, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes, a little lady with the back.
Some of the animals don't make it.
Yeah.
Most of them are released. Are there some that just can't be released, and what happens then?
The lady's asking if most of the animals that she gets are released or if they,
Yeah.
some of them are not.
If it's an animal that can go into an educational program like the bat, then that works. But if they cannot be released, then no, and you can't place them in education, they get euthanized.
You don't have a.
No. Yeah,
You couldn't.
no.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing is if I did that, I would run out of space. I wouldn't be able to take care of the ones that have a chance at going free. And I've watched so many of these things in cages go nuts in a cage that I wouldn't put it through that.
You had a question? Yes, you.
About bats and rabies.
Right.
That's before you start working.
Oh, the question is before dealing with bats, does Laura test for rabies?
I don't, but I always use gloves. And now that COVID's, I also have to wear a mask if I'm working with bats. But I always use gloves. I don't ever take risks, and I have my rabies pre-exposure. So if I'm bitten, I just need a booster. But no, I think the ones that go into education they are given rabies vaccines, and if they already have rabies, they'll die if you do that. But we don't tend to do that. I don't tend to do that. So.
Yes, Ralph.
Did you say a word about the different kinds of food that you give them?
Oh, well, I really do try. I mean, the poor will is an exception. I normally try to feed what they would normally eat in the wild. So mice, obviously, all of the raptors get mice and chicks and quail for, Cooper's hawks. They like the quail. And of course, the osprey gets salmon. And we laughed. We had an osprey that would not eat. And we finally found Norwegian salmon steaks at the grocery store. And he ate one a day. It's like $7 a pop. You want to get the ospreys out as quick as you can.
Wow. Yeah.
Oh, and then, songbirds, of course, you always start with insects for most of them, because almost all of them feed their babies insects, and then you might eventually go to seeds and fruit and stuff like that. But you always try to stay in what would be normal for them out in the wild, because that's where they're going to end up. And having that. That it depends. Mallards and stuff, they'll eat more of the chick starter types of things, but you like to get them duckweed and other things that they would find out in the ponds. Wood ducks, you have to feed them little minnows, little fish. And yeah, grebes and things like that, you'd be feeding them fish.
Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we're going to, oh, yes, one more.
Have a biology background or?
Oh, the lady's asking how Laura started this without having a biology background.
My background is actually in structural engineering. So
Oh, good.
I can build a really good cage. So, but no, I actually had just finished remodeling our house in San Jose, and I was trying to figure out whether I was going back to work or what I was going to do. And I saw an ad for feeding baby birds at the local wildlife center. And I walked in, and that was, they knew a sucker. That remodeling the whole wildlife center. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. I wouldn't know what to do without it.
Well, Laura, this has been fantastic. And
Thank you.
I want to tell you that we Central Sierra Audubon is going to donate $500
Oh, that's
to you,
wonderful,
to
sweet.
your organization. So we're very, very proud of you, proud that you're
Okay.
part of our community, an important
Right.
part of our community. So
Yes.
thank you very much.